But Ram Gopal's response it's interesting to me because he says, well, it's not really my place to do. Plus, you're not ready for it. And if I did this, it would basically fry your brain. According to Yogananda, Mahasaya at one point was literally in the middle of a group photo. And everybody was, avidly taking pictures because they were like, ooh, we're finally getting a picture of Mahasaya. And in the final product of all of these pictures, literally there was no Mahasaya there. Just completely gone from the photo. Mukunda Lal Ghosh was born January 5th, 1893 in Gorakhpur, India. He remembers, even as a baby, that he felt uncomfortable in his body because he was used to having just been a yogi in the Himalayas. He had just been a fully adult human with all capabilities available to him. And he says this is common. A lot of yogis who are reincarnated into new baby bodies remember their old life because they learned how to not associate with that body. So the body, when it died, it didn't mean that they died. And so when they land into new baby bodies, they're really uncomfortable and they want to be grown-ups again. And he remembers this. He grew up in a pretty large family, 8 kids, 4 boys and 4 girls. He was the second born boy. And he grew up in a really loving family. His parents really loved him, and they sounded like they were great parents. He had a good environment. They also sounded like they were pretty loaded, so there's that. And part of his spiritual development would actually begin before he was even born. His parents, I think, were not particularly religious, but his father, he worked for a railway company, and he did pretty well. And one day, one of his employees came to him and he said, hey, Bhagavati, that was his father's name, I would like to have some time off so I can go and study at the feet of my guru, Lahiri Mahasaya. And of course, this didn't sound like a legitimate reason for him to take off work. And Bhagavati was like, he felt bad for him. He's like, you really need to put more effort into this worldly life, into practical matters. You need to get your feet on the ground, buddy. And the employee was so upset about this. And Bhagavati felt bad for him. So he's like, all right, well, let's go for a walk. We'll talk about it. And so as they're talking, they're walking along and they stop by a field. It's a beautiful field and they're just looking over it. And suddenly Lahiri Mahasaya just appears in the middle of the field, maybe a few yards away from them. And all he says is, Bhagavati, you are too hard on your employee. And then he just disappears. He's like, I don't need to belabor this point. I just full body apparitioned in front of you. So we're good. And he did. This 100% within an instant changed Bhagavati's point of view for the rest of his life. And he went home and he told his wife about it. And both of them were overnight believers. And they started to study at the feet of Lahiri Mahasaya. And they would have a picture of him. It's really common for people, it's really common in this book, I assume for people in India who are spiritually minded, to keep a picture of their guru. And they'll pray and focus on that picture. And actually, Mukunda, many years later, after he was born, he was very spiritual from the very beginning. He was always praying. Yeah, that's it. He was just praying a lot. And he would often pray to the photo of Lahiri Mahasaya. And he would see Lahiri Mahasaya physically before him, physically just as though he's not in a photo anymore. And sometimes as a kid, he would go to touch his feet. And touching the feet is an act of deference or respect. But he said that when he would touch the feet, then suddenly Mahasaya was no longer there. He was just the picture again. And when he was 8 years old, he was literally dying of Asiatic cholera. And his mother, who loved him very much, said to him, pray to this photo of Lahiri Mahasaya and he will help you. Pray to this photo. And so he did. He prayed to this photo. And the moment he started to pray, he said that just light came and shone from the picture all over the room. And instantly his nausea went away and he was cured right there and then, as simple as that. So interestingly, about that photo of Lahiri Mahasaya, it took quite an act of Congress to even get a photo of him. He didn't really want his picture to be taken. And you think, okay, I can just take a picture of him anyway. I don't have to get his permission. Not so fast. Apparently, according to Yogananda, Mahasaya at one point was literally in the middle of a group photo. And everybody was, avidly taking pictures because they were like, ooh, we're finally getting a picture of Mahasaya. And there was a group of people behind him. And in the final product of all of these pictures, literally there was no Mahasaya there. Just completely gone from the photo. Just like a blank space. People were just standing around a blank space. And another time he was meditating and one of his disciples came in and just took a bunch of photos, again, without his permission. And when he developed the photos, as you might have guessed, he's missing from them. How that happens, I don't know. And the disciple was so upset about this. He's like, please let me get a photo of you. So Mahasaya was like, fine, you can take one picture of me. And so there's, I believe, one picture of Mahasaya that's available. I don't know if it's still available. And when Mukunda was a kid, his older sister was kind of teaching him something, a lesson or whatever. And also she was putting this ointment, she had a boil on her leg and she was putting ointment on it. And so Mukunda, I don't know if he was thinking or not, just kind of took some of the ointment and put it on his arm, just absentmindedly. And his sister said, you don't have a boil there. Why are you putting ointment on it? And so he said, he might have been just being defensive. He said, well, I think I'm going to have a boil tomorrow. That's why I put it there. And then, of course, she's like, you're a liar. You don't know if you're going to have a boil there tomorrow. And that made him so mad that he said, by the power of will in me, I will have a boil there tomorrow, and yours is going to be twice its size. And she just rolls her eyes and moves along. But the next day, he did have a boil there, and hers had grown twice its size. So, of course, she runs screaming to her mom, and she's like, Mukunda is a necromancer. And his mom gave him a little talking to. She was like, you've got to watch what you say. And literally his boil had to be surgically removed. So he still, to his dying day, he had a scar there. And he said the scar served as a reminder for the rest of his life that there was power in his words and that he would never use the power of words for evil. So when he was 11 years old, his older brother, Ananta, was getting married. And his mother was very excited about this, and she was really busy making preparations to see him off and married. And she'd actually purchased a home in Calcutta so she could oversee all of the wedding preparation. But the rest of the family lived in Bareilly. Remember, I told you they were loaded. And one night, Mukunda in Bareilly is lying in bed. He's sleeping in bed. And the spirit of his mother kind of flows in through the mosquito netting of his bed, and says to him, Mukunda, if you want to see me again alive, then you're going to have to catch the 4 a.m. train to Calcutta. And so instantly he's up and he's waking up his father and he's telling him, we got to go. We have to make the 4 a.m. train. And his father doesn't really believe him. He doesn't take him seriously. And so they don't go anywhere. They don't do anything. And the next morning they receive news that his mother is not well and that she's dying. And so they race to Calcutta to see her one last time, but she was dead before they got there. And this was devastating to Mukunda. He really loved his mother, and it would take him years to get over this death. But 14 months after she had died, his older brother Ananta came to him and he said, I've got something for you. And it was this box from his mother. And Mukunda opened it, and in it was a letter from his mom. And 14 months later, thank you, big bro. But here's why he gave it to him much later. In the letter, she told him that when he was a baby, she took him to see Lahiri Mahasaya. She wanted to get him blessed by Lahiri Mahasaya. And Mahasaya, when he was blessing him, he said, "This baby is going to be a yogi." And then he said, "As a spiritual engine, this child will carry many souls to God's kingdom." And isn't that interesting? He would grow up to write this book, which was very impactful when it came out in the 1940s. And then his mother wrote that when the family lived in Lahore, one day a holy man came to the house and he said, "I need to speak with the mother of Mukunda," which is a weird thing to say. So she came out to talk to him, and he told her that her time on the planet was not long and that her next illness would actually be her last. And she didn't mind hearing this. She was a very spiritual woman, so she only felt peace at hearing this. And he told her, "I need you to take custody of an amulet. And this amulet is going to be passed to Mukunda 1 year after your death." And he said, "I don't have the amulet with me, but it's going to appear in your hand tomorrow while you meditate." And unfortunately, she forgot to meditate, so there was never any amulet. Just kidding. So the next day, during her meditation, she said, lo and behold, she felt the heavy weight of an amulet in her hands. And so that was the other thing that was in the box that Ananta had given Mukunda, this amulet. And the yogi who had told her about it, he said that Mukunda will know what to do. And one day the amulet will actually leave him the way that it came to him. So it'll just disappear. And Mukunda said that when he picked up the amulet, when he saw it, a lot of memories that were dormant came back to him. So memories from previous lives of when he had been a yogi, they just came flooding back to him. Mukunda liked sightseeing. He liked exploring. And he wanted to take a sightseeing trip to Benares, a place called Benares. And it turned out his dad actually had a letter, a business proposition for a friend of his who lived there. But he couldn't remember the friend's address, so he really didn't know how to get this letter to him. However, he did know a holy man who lived in Benares, and he knew that that guy, the holy man, could help him find his friend. So he sent Mukunda to the holy man, and he sent him with 2 letters. And one of the letters was explaining who Mukunda was, and the other letter was the business proposition for his colleague who lived in Benares. So Mukunda goes to this yogi's house. His name is Paramahansa. He goes to his house, and the minute the guy sees him, he says, "Aha, you are Mukunda's son. And yes, I think I can find his friend for you." So he didn't need to read either of the letters. Mukunda's just like, "Oh, okay, I guess I don't need to give you this." And he walks in, he starts talking to the yogi, and the yogi kind of sits down, is chatting with him. And then suddenly the yogi, with his eyes open, just kind of goes into a trance. And it's kind of awkward. If you can imagine, you're just sitting there, Mukunda doesn't really know what to do, and he sees a pair of sandals, and he kind of touches them, kind of fiddles around with them. He's looking around. Then Paramahansa comes out of the trance, and he says, "Your friend is on his way to the house." And that's weird. It's like, how do you know he's on his way to the house? I just told you I wanted to see him, and that doesn't make any sense. We've been sitting here the whole time. And then Paramahansa once again goes into this reverie. And Mukunda's once again, is just kind of sitting there wondering what's going on. And then he comes back out of it and he says, "Oh, he's here." And Mukunda goes to the door. They go to the door and they let in the business colleague of his father's, somehow at the house. And Mukunda says to him, "How did you know to get here?" And the business colleague says, "Oh, well, I was taking a bath in the river, and then Paramahansa came and told me that you were at his house and that you had something to say to me. And so I went, and he and I walked. We walked hand in hand which, by the way, that seems to be a really common thing. I don't know at the time or if it's still a common thing in their culture for people to walk hand in hand. But they walked hand in hand. And then at one point, Pranabananda said, I have to attend to some business. And so he walked off into a crowd. And the business colleague just lost him from there. But then just went over to Pranabananda's house where Mukunda was waiting for him. So I can kind of accept that maybe the full body apparition of Pranabananda showed up in front of the business colleague to tell him that Mukunda's at his house. But what is very hard to accept is that literally he was physically there. Like, they held hands. That is what is so stunning to me. But really, it seems like after reading this book, just a third of it, nothing is out of the realm of possibility here. So for many years, Mukunda would have dreams of going back to the Himalayas, and he was always trying to run away to get there. And he could even remember having a guru, like a specific person. He remembered this person, and he wanted to make his way back to his teacher again. And he couldn't wait to study under him again. It was so important to him. So he was always running away from home and trying to make it to the Himalayas, which probably wasn't safe. And he'd even gotten some of his friends to be interested in it as well, which surprises me because literally these people renounce all things worldly, including girls. So I'm surprised that he was able to get so many people into it. But he was so passionate about it that I guess that's how. And so he got a friend of his named Amar and his cousin Jatinda. And the three of them ran away, and they actually bought English clothes so that they could disguise themselves because he knew that his brother was going to put an APB out on him. So police would be looking for three boys, not dressed like English boys, on the run. And so they dressed like English boys, and they started taking trains on their way to the Himalayas. And Mukunda said on their way there, he said, just think, in a few weeks, we'll be so spiritually elevated, our skin will glow, and tigers will purr at our feet. And Amar is like really excited about it, and Jatinda is not excited about that. Jatinda kind of looks a little concerned. And so at the next train stop, he leaves them. He just totally abandons them. And this actually ended up helping them out a little bit because the cops were looking for three boys, and instead they only saw two. And so the two of them were able to make it, but ultimately they would get caught. And they had to wait for a few days until his brother came to pick them up. But while they were at the police station, once again, he said he was told the most insane story by one of the cops. Because the cop, he said, oh, you're going to be holy men then. Well, let me tell you, something really crazy happened to me the other day. My partner and I were looking for a man who's accused of murder, and he's actually dressed up like a holy man, like a sadhu. He's dressed up like a holy man. So we knew to look out for a holy man. And then we saw one, and we called out to him. We said, hey, stop. And the holy man just kept walking. And we kept calling out to him to tell him to stop. And he wouldn't stop. And so I raised my axe and I chopped his arm clean off. And he said, the man just kept walking. And so then he goes in front of the man and he realizes this is not our guy. This is not a murderer. And he feels so bad. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I chopped your arm off. And the sadhu, the holy man, is like, it's no big deal. It's literally the scene from Monty Python when he's like, your arm's off. And the other guy's like, it's just a scratch. And he's just so contrite. The policeman is so contrite. And he continues to apologize. And he just feels so bad. And finally, the holy man, the sadhu, says to him, look, if you're really concerned, then why don't you just meet me here again in 3 days' time at the same place, and I'll give you something to worry about. No, and I will allay your fears. And so he does that. 3 days later, he and his partner go back to see a man without an arm, most likely. But instead, the same man shows up, standing before them, and his arm is there. He's totally fine. He's got both arms. And the cop said there wasn't even a scratch. And he was just so stunned by this. So later, Mukunda's picked up by his brother, and he's kind of pissed, but it's still okay. And he finds out that Jatinda actually ended up leaving them because he realized we might get eaten by tigers. Because he was like, what if I can't get the tiger to purr at my feet? I don't want to get eaten by a tiger. And for whatever reason, he doesn't explain this 100% in the book, but Ananta, his older brother, is very keen to convince him that he should not go to the Himalayas. And maybe the life of a renunciate or a yogi, somebody who just gives up all worldly goods, just does not seem like fun to Ananta. He just doesn't believe that anybody could possibly enjoy that type of life. That might be why. But he keeps trying to convince him not to go. And so he says, hey, I'll let you go when you graduate from high school. That's fine, you can go. But first, I want you to meet some friends of mine. I have some friends and they know a little about this whole life of a yogi thing. Why don't you come and talk to them? Well, he had already kind of prepped them. He basically told them to say whatever they needed to say to convince Mukunda not to go. And so Mukunda starts talking to this guy, and this guy, the guy is acting like he's a clairvoyant, like he knows, he can predict the future. And he says, actually, I do see that if you become a renunciate, your life will be full of pain and misery. And Mukunda is kind of listening to him and sort of wondering if that might be true. He's still pretty young, like I think maybe he's 11 or 12. And he's wondering if that's true. And so he kind of internally prays to God. And he says, God, if you still want me to be a renunciate, please let me know. Please send a message of some type. And he said right then, literally a man outside the house who was yet another holy man, he's walking by and he says, Mukunda, come out here. And the sadhu, the holy man, said to him, son, do not listen to that ignoramus. In response to your prayer, the Lord tells me to assure you that your soul path is that of the renunciant. So that's a pretty instant response to a prayer right there. And he would get that a lot. It just seemed to come very naturally to him, even as a child. This sort of universe always delivering to him very quickly anything and everything that he wanted. So finally he graduates from high school, and he and a friend, they both moved to this ashram in Benares. But it's kind of not fun to be there. They want to meditate all day. That's what I thought was done in an ashram. But he said that the staff that worked there, they wanted them to work a lot. And they kind of looked down on him as though he was lazy. And he's like, I thought I was supposed to be meditating, people. And maybe he was, I don't know. But he definitely didn't like it there, and neither did his friend. But one day he was walking through town and he saw a holy man. But then he just thought, I don't know him. I'm sure I don't know him. And he just kept walking. And he said as he walked, his feet became more and more numb. And he could just barely, it was like walking with bricks attached to his feet. That was all there was there, these numb bricks. And so he kind of turned back around towards where the holy man was. And as he did that, his feet became totally not numb. He could just walk again. So he paid attention to that signal, and he walked in the direction of this holy man that he'd seen. And sure enough, it was his guru, the man that he had been dreaming of his entire life, Sri Yukteswar. And the two of them were able to have the best reunion. He was so happy to see him again. And Sri Yukteswar said to him, you need to go back to Calcutta and you need to go to college. You need to go to school. And literally this is right after he'd been telling him how he was going to follow him, do whatever he said for the rest of his days. Mukunda said to him, no, He didn't want to go back to Calcutta because he had told everybody there, I'm going off to be a yogi. I'm not going to do this college stuff. I'm not going to do any of that. And now he was basically being asked to go back to college. And it seemed to him to be kind of proving all of them right, that he wasn't really cut out to be a yogi. But there would be a reason for this. Yukteswar ultimately wanted him, and so I think this isn't even what Yukteswar wanted. I think it was what he knew was the best path for him to go to college. Why? Because getting a degree was necessary for him to take the next steps of then traveling to the West and trying to spread his message to all of us. So that would ultimately be the path, but he definitely was not willing to do it at first. And he went right back to his cruddy ashram that he just couldn't stand. And then one day he just had to leave it, and he did. So he leaves the ashram that he doesn't really like, and he's able to get his cousin, Jatinda, who's also at that ashram, to come with him. And he's like, dude, we're going to go to my real guru, Sri Yukteswar. I know where he lives now. We're going to go study at his ashram. And so he and Jatinda are on their way, but they stop in a place called Agra before they go there. And that's because his brother lives there, and it's a good place to stop on the way. And his brother still doesn't want him to be doing this. And so he sets him a bet. And he says, okay, how about this? If you are able to, by the grace of God, take a one-way ticket to this town called Brindaban, if you're able to take a one-way ticket there without any money, with nothing, and then make your way back somehow, by the grace of God, then I will let you be my guru. And this is very unusual because Ananta is an older brother. But Mukunda he's full of faith. He has zero doubts about his well-being. And so he's like, sure, I'll go, no big deal. And he and Jatinda go to Brindaban. And if you remember Jatinda, he didn't exactly have nerves of steel. So he's ridden with anxiety the entire time because they don't even have backup money. And so they get on the train to Brindaban. And on their way there, literally these men sit by them, and the men just like them. This guy is like, oh, I think you're a cool dude. And so he says, you can come, you can have lunch at my, I think he even has an ashram or something. He's a wealthy man, clearly, because when they arrive in Brindaban, they go to his house and they're fed like kings. They have all the food in the world. And it's not some sort of scam. They're fed and then sent along their way to do whatever they want. And then they're sitting under a tree in the shade, and this other man just comes up to them, and he said, I've just been meditating to Lord Krishna, and he gave him a vision of you, exactly Mukunda, sitting under a tree, who's going to help me be my guru. And Mukunda's like, sure, I'll help you. And meanwhile, we want to explore the city. Can you show us around? And so this random man who just shows up to them while they're sitting under a tree takes them all around Brindaban, shows them all the sights to see, feeds them dinner, and also buys them, they haven't asked. They haven't told him that we have nothing, we can't do it. He buys them tickets, train tickets back to Agra without them asking for any of this. I mean, if I had any doubts that there is a God on high who's looking out for everything that I do, that would take him away. So Mukunda has a very strong faith. And he ends up teaching in 30 minutes, by the way. He teaches this man the basics of Kriya Yoga, which is sort of the faith that he follows. And I say that specifically, it took 30 minutes, just in case any of you are looking up how to learn Kriya Yoga and somebody sends you to some seminar that's 8 hours long. You are taking up too much of my time. So then he returns home, and when he gets home, his brother is so stunned. He's like, okay, then why don't you teach me? And he teaches Ananta the basics of Kriya Yoga as well. So then he goes to see his guru again, Sri Yukteswar. And of course, Yukteswar is like, I told you what you need to do. You have to go back to Calcutta and study. You have to get a university degree. And he's like, ugh. But he ends up doing it, and he makes it very clear in the book that he was definitely the C-est of C students. He did whatever he could to just get by because he was not interested in all this learning thing. He wanted to meditate and become one with God. That was his goal. And he would go to school and then also travel to be at his guru's ashram. So he still was able to get a lot of meditating in. And he spoke glowingly of Sri Yukteswar, of course. And one of Sri Yukteswar's students told him that one time, literally, a cobra came slithering in. And he said everybody got up to get away from it. But Sri Yukteswar just sat there very calmly. And the cobra literally put its hood down and ended up slithering between this guy's feet and just off into the bushes. And Yukteswar didn't even bat an eye. It didn't concern him at all. He knew the cobra wasn't going to bite him. And he also had this ability, like a lot of them seem to have, of being able to read minds. So one time, Mukunda was sitting there kind of listening to what he was saying, but also his mind was wandering a little bit. And Yukteswar said to him, "You're not paying attention to anything I'm saying." And Mukunda said, "Yes, I am. And he repeated like the last thing he said. And Yukteswar said, "No, you were just thinking of a house on this hill and then another house on over here," something like that. These two buildings. And that was true. That was exactly what he'd just been thinking of. And the interesting thing, this is sort of an aside that he includes, is that there were these locations that would often just kind of make their way into his consciousness. Like he would see them and he didn't really know what they meant. And ultimately, when he would make his way over to the United States, he would end up living in a building on Mount Washington outside of LA, as well as another building in Encinitas. And those were the exact places that would just pop into his consciousness every once in a while. So he was getting visions of his future. But this whole subject of being able to read minds comes up a lot in the book, of yogis being able to read minds. And he said that one time he was walking with another spiritual holy man, and this sort of very talkative young man came up to them and just started talking their ear off. And he couldn't stand the guy. He's just like walking along, but feeling irritated the entire way. And while the guy is talking, he said the guru, the spiritual man, said to him, "I know you're being driven insane, but I've just spoken with the mother, and she tells me that when we get to that red building over there, this young man will remember something and walk away." And sure enough, when they get to the building, suddenly this guy is talking, and then he's like, oh, he runs away from them. So Mukunda is still in college, and he's still meditating every day, but he really feels like his progress is just not going as fast as he wants it to go. And so he wants to go to the Himalayas, and he asks his guru, can I go there? And his guru's like, "You're not going to learn anything better there than here." But he goes anyway. And he's heard about a spiritual man who lives near the Himalayas. He heard about him from one of his teachers in college, and he even gets his address. He takes the trains, and he's nearby where this man lives, and he stops at a temple, and he goes inside. There's this stone shrine, and he decides not to kneel at it, even though he knows that it's expected for him to kneel and show deference. And he says God cannot be found in this stone shrine, so he doesn't kneel. And he walks back out of the temple, and as he's walking, he asks somebody for directions, and the guy tells him, "Oh, go this way." And so he starts going that way, and it's a very hot day, and he is walking for a very long time. And he asks somebody about how long it will be, and they tell him, "Oh, it's just maybe another 5 minutes." And then hours go by as he's still walking. So he seems to be making almost no progress. And finally, he asks another stranger about directions. And that guy's like, "Dude, that's in the exact opposite direction from where you've been going." But the stranger actually feeds him and even gives him a place to stay, because people are really nice in this country. I don't know what it is. So the next day, he heads out to find this sage, and he's asking people again for directions and asking people how long it's going to take. And he finally asks this other man, how much longer is it? And the man says to him, I was actually going to go away from my place, but since you're coming unannounced, I guess I'm going to stay here. So it turns out this is the guy. This is the exact guy he was looking for. And not only is it the guy, but he even knew that he was coming, of course. And he tells him, you know, yesterday when you refused to kneel in the temple, the universe basically punished you by having that man tell you the exact opposite direction where to go. But even though he comes across as stern at first, he softens a lot, and the two of them, they become friends. And he invites him to stay at his place, of course, and they meditate together for hours. Can you imagine just hanging out with somebody and just sitting there, like just meditating? This is normal for them. It's just what they do. They meditate, and then he realizes that he's getting hungry, and that's when this yogi, his name was Ram Gopal, that's when he gets up to make dinner. And he's so inspired by this guy, he says to him, will you grant me a samadhi? And I think what this is, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I'm pretty sure what this is that basically the deepest sense of meditation that you can get, where you sort of feel like you're at one with all. And I'm guessing Mukunda has never experienced this before. But Ram Gopal's response is interesting. It's interesting to me because he says, well, it's not really my place to do. Plus, you're not ready for it. And if I did this, it would basically fry your brain. And I remember hearing Eckhart Tolle one time saying that there are people every once in a while, I think he even said that maybe there are more of them in India, where they just kind of, or maybe in America that we would just put them away, I don't know. But they kind of are out of it. And they're these people who literally, they're just nuts. And literally the reason they are nuts is because, that's the scientific term, is because they received this spiritual infusion of energy before their body was really ready for it, and it just fried them. So that's kind of scary. And apparently, if Ram Gopal did this to Mukunda, that's what would happen, which is scary. So you don't want anybody giving you a samadhi, even though it sounds nice. And we learn more about it later. But the interesting thing about this guy is that he doesn't sleep. He doesn't sleep. There's yogis who don't do all sorts of things. And I don't know why. You just name it and there's a yogi who's doing it or not doing it. But he thought it was weird that Mukunda wanted him to give him a blessing because he just felt like he wasn't really good enough for it or something. And Mukunda's like, what are you talking about? Like, all you do is meditate. Yeah, because Ram Gopal tells him, yeah, I mean, I meditated 18 hours a day for 20 years. And then I moved to a cave that was even more inaccessible. And I meditated for another 25 years for 20 hours a day. And at that point, I didn't really need sleep anymore because it was more calming to be in the meditative state. And I have heard that for every hour you meditate, you need like an hour less of sleep or something. And I think that might actually be true. I feel like the more I meditate during a day, the less sleep I need the following night. But Ram Gopal is able to convince Mukunda that he's not going to be better off going to the Himalayas, and he's probably better off going back to study with his guru. And so that's what he ends up doing. This time returning to the same temple and being sure to bow before the altar. That's it for today's episode. I'm definitely going to tell more stories from this book in the future. Possibly not for the next episode because I want to break things up a little bit. But thank you all for listening, and I look forward to catching you next time.